guys, welcome back to 1237, back with another review. And this is another movie that is on Hulu that I checked out a couple months back. For some reason, never got around to doing a review for it, so I wanted to go back, rewatch it, and actually do a review for it. And I'm glad I waited because this is a movie that, when I first saw it, I thought it was very straightforward. But upon the second rewatch, I see that there's actually quite a bit of allegory and a metaphor, hidden messages throughout the entire film. Like almost every event that happens is some sort of allegory to something. And the more I thought about it, the more I thought it was very, very interesting. And there's a lot to talk about in that regard. So I guess this might be more of an analysis than a review. But this is a movie you want to go into blind, like I did the first time, because it is a movie that's all in one setting with a limited cast, where just more and more things unfold as it goes along. So I'm going to kind of give a rough review of the positives and negatives, and then I'm going to say spoilers, and then I'll get into what I took away with all the hidden meanings or the allegories and stuff like that. So this is for the 2020 film We Need to Do Something, which is based on a book of the same name by Max Booth III, which came out the same year. And actually, despite its plot, the book and the script was written just prior to the actual COVID lockdown. So since its release, it's kind of been seen as like a COVID film or something that is supposed to represent the lockdown. It could be seen that way. It definitely works that way, but it wasn't the original intention, but it definitely does work. So it was directed by Sean King O'Grady, and Max Booth III wrote the screenplay along with the novel. Stars Vanessa Shaw, who was the oldest daughter and the young mother in the Hills Have Eyes remake. Sierra McCormick, John James Cronin, Lizette Alexis, Pat Healy, who I just talked about in Carnage Park. He was in Innkeepers. He's been in a number of movies that I've talked about, and I always enjoy Pat Healy when I see him. I just talked about him also in Run. He had a bit role in Run. This is sort of typical Pat Healy. He's kind of playing a bad guy or an asshole. And I did not know this, but there's a very brief surprise a voice credit to Ozzy. So keep an ear out for that. And it's only fitting that his part is the most effective part of the entire film as far as scares or creep factor or anything like that. I totally forgot about it on this second watch, and it creeped me out again. The cinematography was done by Jean-Philippe Bernier, and the music was William Hawkins Finn. And it was put out by IFC. So, again, huge fan of IFC, my second favorite company, especially for modern horror. It does have a number of jump scares, but I do believe it's all earned. Everything about this movie to me feels earned. And when I first heard about this film, when I first started watching it, it is about this dysfunctional family that takes refuge in their bathroom to wait out a seemingly really bad thunderstorm. Turns out to be a tornado. There's a tree in front of the bathroom door, so they can't get out, and they're stuck there for days. And there doesn't seem to be any way to get out, get help, any sign of someone coming, or any kind of rescue or escape. And at first I thought this was going to be like one of those trapped in one area survival films, you know, like Adam Green's Frozen, or even non-horror films like 127 Hours, or the car accident film with Adrian Brody, Wrecked. I thought it was going to be more like that, but with a lot of the family drama at the forefront. But it also appears that there's a lot of supernatural elements going on just outside the door. Um, is it demons? Is it monsters? We kind of got to go through the film to find out. Also, judging by the poster, the way the title comes up on the screen with just big red letters and the copyright stuff at the bottom, and just the way this movie plays out and with the orchestration and execution of some of the scenes, I think it's definitely supposed to evoke something from the 70s or 80s. Excuse me. The usage of the song Putting on the Ritz by the taco version definitely gives it that 80s flavor as well. I think that was very effective. Uh, Basically, you have Pat Healy is the alcoholic father. Uh, Vanessa Shaw seems to be the secretive wife and mother. Sierra McCormick, the teenage daughter, she's emo. At first, she seems to be like this cell phone obsessed emo girl, but she might have more ties into what's going on outside than uh, we're first led on. And then there's the kid, Bobby, who I think is like 8 or 10. He's kind of just the young, nerdy kid. And he does very well for a kid actor also. You know, he's like the nerdy, smart kid, but, you know, I believe when he's being silly. I believe when he's scared. I believe when he's hurt. He does do a good job. And then there's a little bit of backstory as into the teenage daughter's life and this sort of relationship with her goth friend, Amy. That's as much as I'll say about that. But it really is just about this family dynamic, and can they survive together? Will they be each other's downfall? They all have their own kind of issues and problems, and what is the threat outside this door? Now, I'm a huge sucker for movies with limited settings and characters. We really only see the 4 family members, her friend Amy, and that's about it. We rarely leave the bathroom except for the flashback scenes. I love movies like that. I can see why some people might find it kind of boring. And I've actually read a few comments and reviews from people that hate this movie because, you know, well, I kind of got to save it for spoilers, but I'm guessing they kind of thought the same thing that I did the first time I saw it. It's a survival horror movie, some sort of supernatural threat outside the door with the family drama at the forefront. No more, no less. With a very ballsy ambition a decision with the supernatural element that I really appreciated. But a lot of the anger, especially its ending and the way they treat the threat outside the door, to me, that just kind of goes along with what I've been saying about a lot of modern horror audiences is they need everything spoon-fed to them. They need exposition. They need to be shown everything. They can't use their imagination. They don't like allegory or metaphor. They don't like to think. Which is sad because a lot of the best horror movies, that's how they tell their stories. And even though this does have plenty of jump scares in it, it's not the straightforward jump scare where you see the threat, it's right there. You see the horror element. And that's just really sad. I think that's kind of a sad reason to dislike this movie. Because once you start breaking it down, it is very interesting and very well pulled off. Also, the score. I think the score is very well done, especially with how it's used. It does kind of get over the top towards the end, which I think also gives it that sort of 80s feel. You know, there's a scene with the dad and a snake where he's like laying down, but we see him kind of rising up, and it's kind of slow, and he's like screaming, and he's got a snake. That and the music is over the top. That was a bit wild and dare I say, cheesy, but it worked within the film. But one of my favorite segments, especially with the music, is we the camera shows the mirror, so we see all the action in the reflection. Where every time it cuts, it's a different family member standing in front of the door, just banging on it, trying to knock it down. Mother, father, son, daughter. And then after, it shows all of them together, just pushing and shoving on this door. And the camera's constantly zooming in. And every time it shows all four of them, it's like this. It just keeps ringing and continuing. Goes through the cycle of family members again. I thought that was very well done. And just what each family member is guilty of, I thought was very interesting. So I'm not sure what else I can say without getting into spoilers, but this is a very good movie to go into blind. That's how I did. Just, I guess, go into it knowing that there's more thought to be had than just this survival horror film with a supernatural threat and all the family drama right up in front. Even though the family drama is well done. So I highly recommend it. And so now I'll get into spoilers and kind of the analysis, I guess, of this review. So the way I see it is we need to do something. Well, first off, this whole ordeal, I think, is a metaphor in and of itself of the dysfunction of the family. We need to do something means we need to do something to survive, get free, get out. We need to do something to make our lives better within the family, whatever that may be. Also, each family member, save for Bobby, is guilty of something. The father, obviously, alcoholism, but also he's the most selfish of the bunch and doesn't offer any help or leadership. The mother is rather dishonest. It hints too that she's having either an affair or desires for someone else. When her cell phone keeps going off, or later on when they vaguely talk about it. But she also keeps telling the kids it's going to be okay, somebody will come. And, of course, that could be used both in a regular family setting and during this ordeal. That's really what I mean by this whole apocalyptic, tragedy is the metaphor for just the inner demons and struggles that this family is going through. The emo girl, Melissa, she represents guilt. She believes this whole thing is her fault because of something her and her goth friend do. But also, I'm sure it's something any teenager feels. When their parents are fighting, her mother's unhappy, the father's an alcoholic. Any teenager could feel that it's their fault. And that Bobby suffers the most, which, because there is this rattlesnake that keeps coming in from time to time. Mostly when the family is arguing, when the parents are arguing. And I think the snake is supposed to represent the toxicity, the venom that will tear this family apart. Bobby does get bitten, and he does die eventually, which I thought was very ballsy as well. They kill off the young kid. In any kind of family setting like this, I think the young child is going to be the most affected. He probably is the most affected. So now by the toxicity of the family, it bites him and he ends up dying. Also, and the family keeps breaking down, the why the father is selfish. He has a thermos that he's hiding his alcohol in. He's forced to quickly drink it so they can use it as a water source. He starts guzzling down mouthwash and sucking on alcohol wipes. At one point, Melissa chugs a whole bottle of NyQuil when she feels even more guilt. And instead of feeling sympathy for her for what she's going through, he gets mad that she didn't save him any. He also gets mad at Bobby when he can't fit through the opening in the door, even though he's trying to shove his son's head through it and it won't fit. So yeah, the selfishness, alcoholism, dishonesty, guilt, also just the whole thing just sort of being a representation of the dysfunction of the family. The hardest thing to pinpoint for me is the relationship between and the character of Amy herself. Now, you could look at Amy as kind of a manifestation of what Melissa wants to be, or Melissa is the result of what Amy does, or you could look at it as Amy just being made up, because we only see Amy out in sort of these flashbacks told through Melissa. Could be just this person that Melissa made up. But supposedly this whole thing is happening because they start a romantic relationship. There's this kid that spies on him, takes pictures, spreads rumors. So Amy wants to cast this spell on him where they need a cow tongue, but Melissa digs up the family dog Spot, rips his tongue out. They do the spell, which I guess the spell is meant to silence this kid Joe, hence the tongue. But it goes totally wrong. Joe dies, and there's something within Amy that's evil or inhuman, and that's what brings on this apocalypse. That for me was the hardest thing to pinpoint, and I still don't quite know what that means. But for me, an easier way to look at it is this supernatural threat outside, to me, is just because they do talk about demons, to me is the psychological and emotional demons within the family. At one point they hear like a dog panting, so Bobby reaches through and he pets it, calling him a good boy. He doesn't even know that Spot's dead, which is another lie the family told him. But then when Melissa reaches through to pet him, that's when we get that creepy line by Ozzy, just, "I'm a good boy." And then it pulls her arm through. And again, that line, very creepy, very effective. And when she pulls her arm back in, she's holding the bloody tongue like she ripped it out, like she had to do with Spot. Meaning the demon can kind of take over anything about the family. And in that case, it happened to be the dog. And we hear like this growling and snarling and crawling all over the house, I guess to show there is some sort of threat out there. At one point, there is someone, calling, like, "Is anybody in here? Anybody need help?" Then we hear growling and screaming and a bunch of gunshots. That could represent that a family problem can only be solved by the family. No outside help will really do anything. And that's what I mean by almost every aspect of this film, every event of this film really does stand for something. And some of these I could be looking a little too deeply into. For example, another time where the camera's just still and it cuts. Every time it cuts, there's a different family member, like using the toilet or standing in the shower. Every time it cuts, there's a different family member using it. To show that they're each in their own world. They're each kind of going through life in their own way. But then when it shows them all together pushing on the door at the same time, or even when they're pushing on the door by themselves, it's like they all have their own struggles, their own fight, and they're all struggling together. They could all be fighting the same fight, but they're all still struggling together. Maybe I'm looking into it too much, but that's what I took away from it. Now, of course, the dad becomes more abusive and angry, especially after Bobby dies. Uh, Melissa does admit that this whole thing is her fault because of a satanic spell. So then he takes it out on her, says that it's her fault, which an abusive parent could say, "Our issues are your fault." Um, then he gets bitten by the snake, as if to say he's the downfall of his own toxicity, and that's the part where he sits up and he's like screaming, and he bites the head off of it. I guess embracing the monster that he's become, which is a reference to Ozzy. He says, "Well, why don't we just eat the snake, bite the head off it like Ozzy?" And she's like, "Wasn't that a bat?" And eventually he does bite the head off. And then, he takes the snake and he whips the mother with it, which could be a symbol of further abuse, or, just sort of taking her down with him. Till eventually Melissa just grabs a glass shard of the mirror, stabs him like 40 times, because sometimes you gotta cut the toxic family member out of the family. There is that dream sequence when she's tripping out on NyQuil, which I do like how that shot. It's all red, and she feels like she's being ignored, and both parents are kneeling in front of her. Mother saying, "Why don't you answer my calls?" Father calling her a witch, and then she's in this great pain, and all this blood spurting out of her. We get these shots, this wide shot of the Pat Healy trying to catch her blood in a thermos, and the mother kind of. But the way she keeps saying, I hurt, I'm in pain, and they're just ignoring her, I guess it's like a manifestation of how she feels her parents ignore her pain. But then there's the whole thing at the end where Diane, Vanessa Shaw, the mother, she's able to break down part of the wall and crawl out. And then Melissa wakes up alone, but then Diane comes back covered in blood, seemingly hysterical and traumatized, saying it's going to be okay, it's going to be okay, it's going to be okay. And then there's just a bang on the door, and then mid-screen just cuts to black in the movie. Which could be to say, no matter what path you take in life after a dysfunctional, abusive scenario, it's going to be challenging, and your demons are always going to follow you. There's always going to be something there coming back to you, which I guess would be the thing bursting through the door to come at them. And the thing I was going to say earlier about people hating this movie is that we never see the actual demons. We never see what they look like. I'm sure they don't like that we stay in this one room the whole movie. Especially when it comes through the door at the very end. We don't see it. It just ends before anything happens. Can't end a movie with ambiguity. Modern audiences hate that because then they'd have to think. I liked it. I really liked that they didn't show the monsters. Because quite frankly, anything that they would have shown would have looked silly. It's not about what the monsters look like. It's about what they represent. I thought that was more effective. And then it ends with the song Putting on the Ritz, which we do hear as a ringtone, seemingly when the dad has lost his mind and goes after Melissa. But then during the end credits. And Putting on the Ritz is kind of a song about putting up a front to the world that everything's fine. And yeah, I kind of went through it kind of quick, but and I'm sure I forgot to mention some things. But I feel like everything that happens, and even the whole thing about, being trapped, just like a dysfunctional family can feel trapped within itself. Diane, even though she desires somebody else and wants to be with somebody else, she stays with this alcoholic, abusive husband for the sake of the family dynamic and the kids. And the only one that's not guilty of anything would be Bobby, but he suffers the most. because of the toxicity of the family, which I believe the snake represents. So yeah, very clever, well written, uh, a metaphorical and allegorical story. Definitely more so than some other films that try to use that or try to have some sort of hidden meanings or messages. I think this is one of the more effective ones because it's done very subtly. First time I saw it again, I thought it was just a survival film with a dysfunctional family. I also like how this film was shot in secret during the pandemic, so they could make it. And yeah, since it came out during COVID, it could be seen as just what a dysfunctional family could be like, stuck inside together with this horrible pandemic going on outside. But I think all the performances work. I love the cinematography. They use the best of their very limited setting. I think all the allegory and metaphors work. I really like the music. And I love the aspect that they don't show any of they don't even show what happens to Joe, the kid they cast the spell on. They just talk about it. So a lot really is left to the imagination and up to the viewer to kind of figure it out and see what they come up with. I love movies like that. I don't need to be spoon fed everything. I know some people do need to, and that's why they don't care for this film. But I'm really glad I waited to do a review for this because I didn't think of this at all the first time I saw it. But very solid film. I liked it a lot. The jump scares were effective, but Ozzy's "I'm a good boy" was definitely the scariest part. Definitely effective, and yeah, I really enjoyed it. But anyway, thank you for watching.